are back with the Hubscale podcast, where we dive into the minds of security leaders all around the world. This week we have Mark Bowling. He spent nearly 20 years in the FBI, focusing on counterterrorism, and was the ASAC for the National Security Program, and is now the Chief Risk, Security and Information Security Officer at ExtraHop. Really excited to have you on the show today, Mark, and super excited to dive into the topics.
Thank you very much, Elliot. It's great to be here, and thank you to Hubscale for inviting me here. It's a pleasure to be here.
No problem at all. So I guess for everybody who doesn't know Mark, it'd be great to give a quick introduction.
Yeah, my name is Mark Bowling. I'm the Chief Risk, Security and Information Security Officer at ExtraHop. I've been there for just over 2 years now, almost 2.5 years. And my role basically is I am responsible for all risk management other than, some legal contract stuff, which legal handles. I'm responsible also for all facility, physical, and personnel security. And then, of course, I have all of the normal duties of a CISO, Chief Information Security Officer. So I have all matters pertaining to information assurance, information security, and cybersecurity. So that's me.
No, super exciting. I love what ExtraHop are doing, which I'm sure we'll dive into in just a moment. But take me back to the early days, Mark. Obviously started in the Navy and then obviously moved into the FBI. Just take me back to the early days.
All right. So I was in the nuclear Navy, United States Nuclear Navy. I was originally going to go to subs. Of course, we won the Cold War. So we decommissioned a bunch of early subs. 637 class is what we called them. And so I ended up going to the USS Enterprise in dry dock, helped refuel 3 of her 8 reactors. And I got to tell you, what I learned in our nuclear Navy was operational trust, the need for operational trust. You have to trust your equipment. You have to trust the sailors around you to do their job because you're working with nuclear weapons. You're working with nuclear propulsion units. Technical competence. You have to understand technical competence. And finally, I call it precision, also known as attention to detail. You have to get it right. You have to pay attention to the details, and you have to understand what you're doing. So it was a great experience. It was a great experience from a technological perspective. It was a great experience to help get the USS Enterprise back to the fleet, where she provided a lot of combat capability.
Yeah, no, super cool. And then obviously driving through forward your career, 20 years in the FBI. I know there's a story which we'll talk about later on, but just talk to me about that journey.
Sure. So initially I started in counterterrorism, and I'm not going to say precocious, but I had some ideas. And I said, hey, we could use technology to do this and this and this and this. And I was originally on a squad CT4, which had an organization called the National Islamic Front. And the cool thing about that is Osama bin Laden was in South Sudan, and National Islamic Front was both a terrorist organization and the ruling party of Sudan at the time. So I kind of worked with the CIA a little bit on Osama bin Laden. I saw some opportunities to utilize technology and suggested those. And before I knew it, I found myself on a squad there, once again, still in Washington, D.C., that did what was called closed access, which meant we did things in the United States that other 3-letter agencies in the United States are not statutorily allowed to do. So it was really cool work. And that's all I'm going to talk about. That's all I'm going to say about it, because I can't talk about it. But it was really cool. It's called Tailored Access. There's an organization and another 3-letter agency called TAO, Tailored Access Operations. And so we worked with TAO to do work for them. I was also, because I was a little bit of a techie, I became one of the first members of what is now known as CART, the FBI's Computer Analysis Response Team. But that was their this is our digital forensics program, and I was one of the early members of CART. And so doing CART and working on some of those closed access programs kind of set me up to move right into the cyber field as I moved on through the Bureau.
Yeah, no, it's super exciting because obviously it's quite a unique background, especially coming through all that realm as well. So you mentioned earlier on about just the Navy side and what you learned about the operational piece and trusting your colleagues. But what did you learn throughout the FBI days? What was the kind of the key learning things that you had?
Well, the FBI is and was a great organization. It's run into some bumps lately, and I understand why. But once again, trust. You have to trust your colleagues. If you're on a tactical team in the FBI, you have to trust the guy behind you going through the door behind you. You go left, he goes right, someone else goes straight. So you can't take the whole room yourself. And so you have to trust the people around you. The FBI, one of the real strengths it had is that, and I believe it still has, is its operational processes are very well documented. So you do your job and you follow the processes, and it's very much like what I called the attention to detail that I learned in the nuclear Navy. So the FBI pays attention to the details, and that's why they're so successful at making cases. But there are some other things that I learned in the FBI, for instance, the need to collaborate. For instance, what we call a public-private partnership. And that's what we known as the ISACs, the Information Sharing Alliances. We have 17 identified critical infrastructures here in the United States. That's how we break them up. And so we collaborate with those critical infrastructures. I'll talk a little bit about that vis-a-vis the Joseph Konopka, Dr. Chaos case, but also working with the local and state and municipal agencies, the county agencies, working with local law enforcement so that we can execute the entire mission rather than just focusing on our part of the mission. So I would say what I learned was the need to collaborate with the civilian industries to help protect them from a cyber perspective, as well as how to collaborate with other law enforcement agencies.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I can imagine that's kind of paid into a lot of fact in terms of the gig now with ExtraHop and the journey you've had there already. So just tell me about ExtraHop. Obviously, you've got kind of 3 roles there, responsibility. But just tell me about, number one, your position in there and why is it so important, and then of course tell me about ExtraHop as well.
Okay, so when I was offered the CISO role, I said, hey, let's do this. I recognize maybe we had some challenges on the physical security side, that it was a tech company. They hadn't thought about it but there weren't a lot of people there, for instance, from the military or from law enforcement. So there was nobody really wearing what I call the chief security officer hat. And they had not documented their risks very well either. They had no risk register. So when I sat down with the chief legal officer, Lauren, I said, hey, Lauren, let's create a role that addresses risk, including cyber risk, but also physical security risk, project risk, all of the risks that are unquantified. So we want to quantify those risks so we can ensure we apply adequate resources to those risks. So I said, let's build a role that's chief risk officer, chief security officer, and chief information security officer, wrap them into one role. And what you find out is a lot of the compliance frameworks like ISO 27001, Center for Internet Security top 18, version 8, top 18 critical security controls. They touch on things. There's a whole section on physical security, ISO 27001. There's a whole section on personnel security in ISO 27001. And so in my role, I'm in the position to ensure that we're satisfying all of our compliance frameworks that we need to have. FedRAMP, very, very serious compliance framework for us. So in my chief risk role, I also get to dabble in things like saying, hey, we need a project management office, so that we have less project risk, so that we appropriately prioritize our project management resources. And I can say, hey, we have this physical security concern, so let's address this physical security concern with additional surveillance equipment or with additional newer locks, more robust external barriers. And so all of those things are allowing me to ensure that ExtraHop does what we need to for our customers, as well as we do what we need to for our compliance requirements.
Yeah.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it sure does. It's a really interesting role, obviously being having kind of 3 positions, but they kind of make sense, especially with your background. So I guess why ExtraHop then? Obviously, I can imagine you probably got a lot of offers when you was joining ExtraHop, but why this particular company?
Well, it was really fun. I had been in a startup, United Capital Financial Advisors, and I was really excited about them going IPO, and instead they were purchased by Goldman Sachs. And I was their virtual CISO at the time, and I figured that, hey, I'm not going anywhere. Let's see what happens. And Goldman Sachs said, no, we'd like to keep you. We want to make you a business unit ISO. We're going to merge United Capital internally with another organization, another subsidiary, and create a subsidiary called Goldman Sachs Personal Financial Management, High Net Wealth Management, or financial management, financial advisors for high net wealth people, customers. And so I was pretty happy there. And then a guy named Raja called me up. And the cool thing about Raja Mukherjee, he was one of the founders. He's now our chief science officer. I had known Raja 20 years ago when he was in Wisconsin. So he was one of my liaison contacts. He worked for Strong Funds as their chief network architect, security architect, and I was running the cyber program. I was the cyber program coordinator for the Wisconsin field office, kind of a small state in the north part of the United States. And we had kept in touch with each other for 20 years. Some 14 years ago, he started ExtraHop. And what was funny is he had started ExtraHop, and I didn't know. That was the same Raja Mukherjee who founded ExtraHop. But 5 years ago, almost 6 years ago now, I purchased ExtraHop when I was a director of security and compliance at a hospital system. So here I was, an ExtraHop customer, and then Raja reaches out to me on LinkedIn and said, hey, what do you know about ExtraHop? I said, hey, I loved it when I was at a hospital before I went to United Capital. And so we just got talking, and he asked me to come on over. And at that time, I was our VP of managed and professional services. So we had managed services. At the time, I had been running for some 8 years my own consulting company. That's kind of how I slipped into that virtual CISO role at United Capital. And so I said, hey, this would be cool. I wouldn't have to worry about my own business development, wouldn't have to worry about my own HR. I just run people and do consulting. And so I did that for about a year at ExtraHop. And then the chief legal officer came to me and said, hey, Mark, would you be willing to consider a CISO role? And I've kind of talked about that. And I said, well, I'd rather it not just be a narrow CISO role. Let's handle all risk, and let's handle physical security also. And so that's kind of how I ended up at ExtraHop. I'm really glad to be here.
I just wanted to dive a little bit more into ExtraHop because the NDR world is super interesting to me, number one. Just tell me about the ExtraHop product and why do you think it's going to be so successful?
Well, I think it's a great product. I'm not trying to go into salesman mode, but I'm really excited about the product. Once again, I bought it 5 years ago when they were selling it as an NPM product, network performance management product. I purchased it for network visibility, for network detection and response. It's interesting that before they were selling it for NDR, I bought it for NDR at a hospital system. So, but here's what I want to tell you. RevealX, that's the product, and it provides a clear picture of what I call truth in an enterprise's network. Now, IP does not lie. You know how, was it Shakira, hips don't lie? Well, IP does not lie. What you see is what you get on the network. Now, they can obfuscate it with encryption, but it's still there. And for any hacking attack requires three things. Requires a source IP address, a destination IP address, and Ethernet transactions between the two. And guess what? ExtraHop observes all three of those things. So ExtraHop establishes the truth of what's in the network. But it has three superpowers that I love. Okay. First is what I call our unmatched scalability, which allows it to see volumes of data that overwhelm other tools. And it just does it, just picks it up. It is so scalable because of the technology behind the tool itself. Second thing is it has a unique ability. It's the only NDR tool that can do this. It has a unique ability to decrypt packets. Nobody else does it. We can do it. That allows us to observe the contents of that obfuscated data. And that way you can tell if somebody's using unauthorized encryption on your network, something that bad people do, that attackers do when they when they're getting ready to exfiltrate large amounts of data. The third thing it does, third superpower, is it has what I call unparalleled visibility into cloud networks. So we have visibility into Google Cloud Platform. We have visibility into AWS. We have visibility into Azure. And so because of that, we don't just see a premise network the way some tools do, and we just don't see a cloud network that maybe one cloud provider provides exclusively for their network. It's not like GuardDuty or CloudWatch in AWS, okay? We see it all. So you don't have to have 4 different tools to see your entire network. You have one tool that allows you to see your entire network. So the 3 superpowers are scalability, unmatched scalability, unique ability to decrypt packets, and then, of course, unparalleled visibility into cloud environments. Now, the other thing that's really cool, other than our superpowers, is that we're creating what I call operating modules, which is awesome. So the 3 operating modules, we have next-gen IDS, intrusion detection system. That's awesome for government clients. See, the government has these regulations, thou shalt have an IDS, just like PCI DSS, thou shalt have an IDS. So if we said, oh, it's NDR, well, it's not IDS, so we can't buy you. So now but we're seeing the same stuff. And in fact, we're seeing it better. Most IDSs only see data coming in at the perimeter. That's how most of them work. We see it across the entire network, east, west, and north, south. So our next-gen IDS has unparalleled visibility because it's built on our NDR. We have, of course, our traditional NDR, network detection and response. And then, of course, we still have our bread and butter NPM, network performance management. And let me tell you about network performance management. Network performance management is what helps our customers do what's called digital transformation. So you have these companies that are moving from a premise environment to a largely cloud-hosted environment. They're moving their apps there. They're moving their internal enterprise apps. And how can you see both environments so you're making sure that your old stuff was working fine on-prem is now working well in the cloud for the entire environment. And that's where a tool like ExtraHop is extremely powerful. Now, another thing I want to tell you about ExtraHop is what I call our partnerships. We have amazing partnerships because we don't do everything. Okay, so if you look at what I call the NIST cybersecurity framework, there's 5 functions: identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. In those 5 functions, there's about 40 what are known as categories. There's 6 in identify, 5 in protect, etc. And in those categories, they have what are called subcategories. But if you look at them, they're very, very similar to safeguards, what are known as safeguards in the Center for Internet Security, critical security controls. They're very similar to what we would consider as controls in like the COBIT framework or ISO 27001. We help our customers do about 73 of those. I've documented it. 73 of those subcategories we help our customers do, okay, either through visibility or we just explicitly do the entire function. But we don't do it all. There's another, 60 things we don't do. We don't do EDR. We don't do SIM, provide comprehensive visibility across your entire environment. So we have partnerships. So for instance, we have integrations with Splunk. We have integrations with CrowdStrike. We have integrations with Palo Alto. And those integrations allow us to work better with those tools so that if somebody's looking at their screen for Splunk, they know everything that's happening on the network, as well as everything that's happening with their EDR tool. Or if you're a CrowdStrike Falcon Complete customer and you're looking at Falcon Complete, you get everything from their endpoint detection into Falcon Complete and everything from our network detection and response into Falcon Complete. We actually, we're working on a very, very tight integration with Hubscale, which is CrowdStrike's SIM tool. So I think if you look at what we do, it's absolutely unique. If you look at the people we integrate with, it's absolutely unique. And then, of course, if you look at the kind of jobs we do, NDR, NPM, next-gen IDS, were absolutely unique. So it's a powerful tool that has a great future.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I probably talked more than you wanted about that.
Sorry, just had a cough there. No, I absolutely loved it. I think you're right. Technology alliances kind of show a lot about a company.
Yes.
And if you've got CrowdStrike, Palo Alto Networks, and all of the kind of the top players, as well as ExtraHop, of course, it's super exciting to move forward in the industry and to make the customers safer, right? That's the whole kind of outlook that everybody needs.
Exactly.
So no, super exciting stuff. And I want to kind of switch it back now to something that we kind of mentioned previously. And you and I was talking about this before. I've been doing some research and reading up about Dr. Chaos. But tell me about the Dr. Chaos story, Mark.
So I'd mentioned about when I knew Raja back in Wisconsin. So right after Raja moves to Seattle, takes a job with F5, I have this massive case, and this is a great case in the state of Wisconsin. But first thing I want to point out is this case was built around three things. It was built around intelligence. I had sources who gave me information. It was built around, remember that public-private infrastructure relationship? I had a great relationship with Wisconsin Energies. You know, it used to be known as Wisconsin Public Service Corporation, but it's now Wisconsin Energies. I have a great relationship with Tom Els, their chief security officer. And of course, great relationships with the local law enforcement officers, specifically in this case, up in the Green Bay area, the Brown County area, northeastern Wisconsin. So the first intelligence I got was from three different sources. One was a guy in Madison. He was kind of a gray hat type of kind of guy. He said, hey, I know who Dr. Chaos is. I'd never heard of Dr. Chaos, but it was like, cool. The second, I did an investigation up in Green Bay of an internal misconduct of the system administrator at a small healthcare servicing company. I think they did healthcare record, one of those records, entering medical records into a EMR, electronic medical record system. He was engaged in some internal misconduct. So I went up and talked to him. And when I was interviewing him, he said, well, why are you looking at me? The real problem you really should look at is the system administrator over at Infinity. So sysadmin at Infinity, hear the name Dr. Chaos. Finally, Tom, through my relationship with him, and there's this great public-private partnership the FBI has called InfraGard. And Tom Els was one of our InfraGard members, and I was always at the InfraGard meeting, meetings, it was monthly, talking to our liaison contacts. He comes up to me and says, Mark, we're having our electrical power distribution substations up in Northeast Wisconsin are getting hit. They're these little enclosures that had transformers and distribution arrays, and somebody's like breaking into them and causing shutdowns. And so I had this intel. So then I get a call from Brown County, and Brown County says, hey, we kind of have this little ad hoc task force, wondering if you'd come up and help us out with it. We picked up a couple kids burning setting fire to a dumpster, and they were telling us they were part of this realm of chaos. They follow Dr. Chaos and they attack electrical power distribution substations. So boom. So now I get a call from local law enforcement where they're talking about arson. But because I've heard the name Dr. Chaos as a hacker, I've heard from Tom Els that there are attacks on electrical power distribution substations. All I need to do is tie it into Infinity Technology. I go up, I interview these kids who had been picked up, burning stuff, and they spill all the beans. So we set up a surveillance on Infinity Technology where Dr. Chaos, Joseph Konopka, would meet with this band of youth offenders. And then based on that, we followed him, caught him burning stuff, bring in Joseph Konopka. I interview him for about 2 hours at Brown County Sheriff's Office, and he makes a full confession. And so this story actually has two parts, though. The first part is the first investigation in northeastern Wisconsin of the realm of chaos. And what we found out is that there were attacks on critical infrastructures. He had probably attacked some 20, maybe 30 electrical power distribution substations. Some of those attacks were very serious. So what he would do is take a bolt cutter, cut the locks on the enclosures, and then you take that bolt cutter and cut what's called the concertina wire, that razor wire, on top of the fence, roll that up, and then throw it over what are known as the feeder arrays at the power substation. That would cause the grid to short out. It would short out those feeder arrays, damage the transformer, several $1,000s, and then cause what we would call a regional blackout. There were at one point up to 14,000 people lost power from him doing that. And on a couple of occasions, there were what we would consider residential facilities for we would consider them the common term here in the United States, old folks home, but they need to have electricity because you have people on heart monitors, you have people on respirators. So there were, in fact, medical facilities like those, and even a hospital lost power and had to revert to emergency backup power. So what we found out was that Joseph and his followers, the Roman chaos, were attacking all these little substations. But the way Joseph recruited them is at Infinity Technology, he would set up this big gaming thing, and they would get together and play Doom. I don't know, do you remember original Doom? They would get together and play Doom on the local area network there at Infinity. And then they'd, after, at about midnight, they'd all get crazy, and then they would go out and start tearing stuff up and burning stuff. They'd burn couches on the street. If they were left there, for the garbage men to take away, they would burn dumpsters. And of course, they would attack the critical electrical power infrastructure. They even would go to farms that had these complex irrigation systems. They'd break into the irrigation control shed and mess with the industrial control systems that manage the irrigation, the pumps and the valves and everything. So that was the first part of the investigation. Do you have any questions about that before I continue talking?
Yeah, I just, it probably could be something to the end, but why did he confess so easy? And what was the reasoning behind doing all this craziness?
Well, I don't want to be self-ingratiating. I want to pound my chest or anything, okay? But he literally said to me, we got to know each other. And he literally said to me, you're the first adult I've ever talked to who understands what I'm talking about. Because I could talk to him about technology. And I could talk to him about networks. And so we built a relationship around that. I thought it was brilliant. I was hoping at that time, before he fled to Chicago, I was hoping at that time that I would flip him as what I would call an operational source and use him online against, for instance, Russian organized crime, because he had street cred. But, he'd probably get 20 years of probation because he did a lot of damage. But I thought at that time I could flip him. But, of course, that's not what happened. But I think when I first interrogated him, he was 24 years old. And I don't believe he ever had a lot of what I would call positive male affirmation. Does that make sense? And so I said, man, you're smart. Tell me about what you're doing. Why are you doing it? Why are you angry? Why are you frustrated? And one of the things I found is that he, I think he was in his mind playing with being, kind of one of these anti-government anarchists. I'm not sure he was there when he was 24, but that's the direction he was going. I know that he had a signed copy of the Anarchist Cookbook, which was not written by a guy named Uncle Fester, but there's a guy in northeastern Wisconsin known by the name of Uncle Fester. He actually just got arrested again. Come on, grow up. But so Uncle Fester, I feel like, was kind of mentoring Joseph Konopka as an anarchist. But Joseph and I, got to know each other, and he appreciated that I appreciated his intelligence. And so, that's why he confessed the first time. And he actually confessed the second time in Chicago. But I believe that's why he confessed. Yeah. I really do.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Well, and at the time, he did not have a lot to lose, because there were like 17, 16, 17, 14 to 20-year-olds who were following him. And every single one of those guys had confessed,
Yeah.
So he was, by the time I sat down with him, I had a pretty good idea how many attacks on electrical power substations, how many attacks on farming systems. And he was probably looking at 30 charges for arson and vandalism at the state level that we weren't even going to look at the federal level. So I think he said, I'm going to just try to, make the best of it. But so I think that's why he confessed the first time.
Yeah. Yeah, no, makes complete sense. So tell me about the second part then, Mark.
That was I think December, I want to say it was December of 20. And then in March of 21, his mom calls me. I think somewhere time between January and March. I don't know the exact date. But his mom calls me and says, hey, he's going to flee. And I said, well, tell him not to flee. That's just going to make things worse. And she said, well, he's made up his mind. He's going to go. I said, well, will you talk to him? I said, sure, I'll talk to him. But he didn't want to get on the phone. So he fled and gone. Well, September of that year, September of 2021, we had 9/11 here in the United States. So I kind of redirected from managing a cyber task force to helping to set up with another agent named Katie, the computer crime or the counterterrorism task force in Milwaukee field office, FBI's Milwaukee field office. And what happened was his crimes were no longer cyber crimes and anarchist stuff. He became a domestic terrorist. So now, so we were working hard, and I probably spend the next 5 or 6 months working on developing sources for the global war on terror. And then I get a call from Chicago. It's University of Illinois, Chicago. And they say, hey, Mark, we've got one of your fugitives. Really? Yeah, what's his name? And I said, well, Joseph Konopka. I said, I am on my way. So instead of driving north to Green Bay, Wisconsin from Milwaukee, I used to drive south to Chicago. I show up in Chicago, and once again, this is an example of the great relationship that the FBI has with local agencies, Chicago PD and the University of Illinois, Chicago Police Department. They had him in custody. I get briefed up, and they'd found him in what are known as the steam tunnels underneath the University of Illinois, Chicago. So I go to Cook County temporary holding the kind of the lockup where he was, spend 4 hours. I take 20 some pages of notes, and I get a 14-page handwritten confession. He tells me everything he's doing. He had fled Green Bay, went to Madison, went from Madison to Chicago, and he was involved in Chicago it's not a terrorist group called Q. It's just a CUE, Chicago Underground Exploration. So if you know anything about Chicago, they've got these old railway tunnels literally under the city. And so people go and explore them, and they explore all these, heavily damaged structures in the downtown Chicago area, kind of the slum area. So I'm interviewing him, and I say, so what's going on? He tells me that he actually is living in the Chicago subway. And I feel like he's glad he got caught. He was tired of running. He was living in, literally, you have the subway line, and then you have this little branch off the subway line, little tunnel, you have a walkway along the subway and little branch tunnel, and then a storage room. He had learned how to pick locks, and he had taught himself how to pick locks. He was smart, and he was living in there. But what we found in there was potassium cyanide and hydrochloric acid. So potassium cyanide is rat poison, okay, in a solid form. Hydrochloric acid he had found that at one of the maybe a cleaning room. And if you mix those together, you get cyanide gas. And he was actually thinking about creating a cyanide gas cloud in the Chicago subway system during rush hour, which would have undoubtedly killed thousands of people, or not thousands, maybe dozens of people. Potentially. I mean, you would have to have a lot of it, and you have the motion of the train and everything could disperse it. But I really feel like that's kind of what doomed him, was him having kind of the anarchist bent and then having that capability. So actually in Chicago, Northern District of Illinois, the federal district, he was the first person convicted of the Patriot Act. Once again, this is within months of 9/11. So he's literally the first person convicted of the new weapons of mass destruction statute in the Patriot Act. And so there was, at that point, there was no getting around it, you know.
Yeah, that's a crazy story. I remember you telling me briefly the last time.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's
great to be part of it. It felt good to have done something that, you know, potentially saved American lives.
yeah, no, for sure.
You know, go ahead.
Yeah, I didn't know it was so close to 9/11 as well. I bet there was just no type, whatever he was planning to do, there was no way at all he was getting away with it, was there? So no, it's really good that you did the hard work, Mark, and got him.
Thank you. And there are a lot of good agents in Chicago, their evidence response team. When they went to his, you know, hideout, it was basically because of the rat poison, because of the hydrochloric acid, it had to be treated as a toxic waste environment. So the evidence response team, they had to put on these Tyvek suits and respirators to go in and clean it out. It was that bad. And that's where Joseph was living. But so, I mean, I didn't do this all myself. The evidence response team out of Chicago and the cybercrime task force or the counterterrorism task force out of Chicago, they did some, you know, good interviews of some of the people around. Joe, I don't want to make it sound like I did everything.
No, for sure. Like you mentioned earlier on, it's all about teamwork, right?
Absolutely.
But Mark, no, I appreciate you telling that story. Super insightful, super interesting. Number one, but yeah, we're closing towards the end of the podcast. But I always like to kind of ask one question completely off topic.
Sure.
What kind of closing the podcast? If you had to go back to the beginning of your career, what would you tell yourself?
So I would tell myself that you need to be humble and you need to listen. That's absolutely what I would tell myself. And I mean, I was technically accomplished and I was a hard worker, but there were a lot of times I just needed to be humble and listen, you know. And then there are times, even if the other person's wrong, you need to let them win. Because, like you said, teamwork is more important than being right. I don't think there's anything to be gained from what I call artificial conflict. And, you know, you talk to people who have been married for 40 years, 50 years, you know. Kristen, my wife and I are 31 years. And so it's like, sometimes you just have to say, you know, it's not about me. I'm going to listen. I'm going to defer to the other person. So that's the first thing I would say is defer to the other person more often than not.
Yeah.
Did that answer your question?
It sure does. I ask it to everybody at the end of the podcast. I think it's quite insightful what people say. And I like that as well. You're not always right. And even if you are sometimes, just take a step back. Nothing really matters, does it?
Well, what you find out is that relationships matter more than being right. And the web of relationships that you have around you is what makes the team better. And every single corporation, every single organization, be it commercial or nonprofit or governmental, they're still teams. And it's that web of relationships. You will get more done being an effective influencer where people respect you because they know you listen and they know you are approachable. Then you will always being the person who's right.
Yeah, I like it. I like it a lot, Mark. Well, no, well, really do appreciate you coming on the show. I think it's been super interesting and insightful for a lot of the listeners and myself as well. So thank you for coming on. And yeah, looking forward to seeing what ExtraHop does in the future, and good luck to everything on your side.
Well, thank you very much, Elliot. And once again, on behalf of myself and ExtraHop, thank you very much to you for having me on the show. And thank you very much to Hubscale.